Hi, I'm Dr. Emma Diaz. Thank you so much for watching this video. I'm going to talk a little bit about EMDR and if it might be the right fit for you as it relates to trauma therapy. As a trauma psychologist, I do a ton of different types of trauma treatments with folks all day, every day. EMDR is one of the therapies that has the best name recognition, which means that you've probably heard it around. My guess would be if you started talking to your friends, talking to other people in life, you would know at least one person who's done EMDR or knows someone that's done EMDR. EMDR is also a therapy that gets recommended a lot by providers. So medical providers, outpatient mental health providers, other providers will often recommend EMDR when what they really mean is trauma treatment. Sometimes people talk about EMDR like it's this magical sort of process that can make anyone better all the time, no matter what, and it's always going to work. In my experience, EMDR is helpful for certain types of traumas and certain types of people. And for those folks, it's really, really effective. It doesn't work for every single human. I've never met a single therapy that works for every single human. So if you've tried EMDR in the past and it hasn't worked for you, that doesn't mean that trauma therapy can't help you or other things can't help you. It just means it may not have been the best fit. I want you to know that. If you've tried trauma therapy in the past and it hasn't worked, there can be a lot of reasons why. It doesn't mean that you will never get better. So let's talk a little bit about the types of folks that I see EMDR work the best with. EMDR is really good for folks often that have more than one trauma, although it can be good for folks with just one trauma too. Some other treatments are really designed for just one trauma, so EMDR was one of the treatments that when it came out was really great because it tackles different pain points and trauma points that have happened throughout a person's life. EMDR is really, really great for people that have two sort of defining characteristics. One of the characteristics is if you are a person that has really intense, vivid images of the trauma that bother you. If you are the kind of person that feels like you have the images of the trauma, thoughts of the trauma, basically uninvited guests related to the trauma, thoughts, nightmares, things like that are really intense and distressing and upsetting to you. If when you think about the trauma, your palms get sweaty, you start to get sweat on the back of your neck, your heart starts to feel like it's racing. If you're having these sort of intense reactions to the trauma memory itself or thoughts of the trauma, EMDR is likely going to be a good fit for you. EMDR is also going to be a really good fit if you're someone whose self-image has been hurt because of the trauma. Let's say that you feel like the trauma happened because you're a bad person. And so, of course, the trauma happened because you're bad and you just attract trauma. You're like a trauma magnet. EMDR will help you change the way that you think about yourself. EMDR can also be really good for folks whose perception of themselves changed after the trauma. Let's say that following a rape or a sexual assault or neglect or a combat event or a shark attack, whatever it is. Let's say that following that, you had this view of being broken. Maybe it's because of the trauma itself. Maybe it's because of your reaction to the trauma. But afterwards, you have this view of yourself as this shell of a person, and you feel like because of the trauma, you're unlovable, you're broken, you're no good, you're worthless. That's a good indication that EMDR might be a good fit for you in terms of therapy. These are the two types of people that I see really benefit the most. So folks that have these intrusive memories that are really upsetting and folks whose perception of themselves has changed because of the trauma. All EMDR is not created equal. I've met with folks before who have tried EMDR in the past and it didn't work. And when they work with me, they feel like it's been a completely different process than in the past. A lot of EMDR trainings allow for a lot of flexibility. So you're going to find differences in the way that people do EMDR, even though the core of what's happening is the same. I attended a training that really focused on this interdisciplinary model, and a lot of it was based on emotion regulation and attachment, which is basically how secure we feel in our relationships. When I do EMDR with folks, there's a few different phases. So the first part is really making sure that folks have the ability to ground themselves and to regulate themselves when they're processing the trauma. When you're processing the trauma, you want to be within a certain window of tolerance, which basically means that you're upset enough that you're accessing the memory and you're actually dealing with the memory, but not so upset that new learning can't occur. You want to be regulated enough to be able to follow thoughts, dig into themes. It's okay to cry if you reach the point where you're so overwhelmed that you are not processing anything that's happening. Within this theory, we say that new learning isn't happening at that point. You're not going to get better if you're outside of your window of tolerance. So the first step is making sure that you're regulated. I'm actually planning to offer some meditations and things like that. I do a lot of self-compassion meditations with my folks on YouTube so that you'll have the opportunity to use those as you might like. The grounding can happen in an individual setting or in a group setting. I'm a big fan of getting some of your emotion regulation and grounding tools in a group setting for a few reasons. One is because it is sort of just the most effective method. You can pay a one-on-one therapist to help you learn how to ground yourself, but you can also learn a lot of these skills on your own. So in a group, you're going to be learning with other people, and it's going to be more cost effective, but you're also going to be learning from other people because other people are going to be sharing their experience of what worked and what didn't work so that you can try out some things in addition to what your individual therapist is telling you. The next step is to create a timeline of events. When I do EMDR with folks, we go all the way back to your earliest childhood memories. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to come up with memories that hang together based on this negative belief that the trauma has caused. Let's say that someone experienced a trauma in their 20s, and that is the thing that bothers them the most. We're still going to go back to earlier in time because we're going to say, when you experience that trauma in your 20s, what actually bothers you about it? How does it make you feel about yourself when you think about it? And together we're going to come up with a negative cognition, which is basically this belief that you have about yourself because of the trauma. This negative cognition, you'll know that you got it right if it feels like it kicked you in the gut when you think about it. It should be something that's hard to think about. The people that get the most out of therapy are the people that are willing to really go to those vulnerable places and be honest with themselves. Let's say that you have this belief that you are worthless, and it's really hit its peak when you were 25 and you had this trauma. But EMDR theory says that there are sprinklings, there are breadcrumbs of this belief that happen earlier in life. So maybe you had a teacher that made you feel really stupid in class when you didn't give the right answer. Or maybe you had an event with a family member. Sometimes it's not even that person's fault. Let's say that you had a parent who died and your other parent just couldn't cope with it. And they were trying to be a good parent, but they left you at school all the time and you were never getting picked up on time and you just felt like you didn't matter. The idea is that by going to these earlier points in your life, we're starting to unweave these strands of trauma that get more and more intense as time goes on. And when you maybe have more big traumas in your life. From there, we get into the actual processing, which is where we use oftentimes a light bar, or you can hold these paddles and they vibrate one hand and then the other. The idea is that we're wanting to activate bilateral stimulation. You can look up bilateral stimulation, find a lot of articles. There's a lot of people who don't know exactly what works about EMDR or why it works. There are some folks that really believe that the brain works differently. You're accessing both parts of your brain when you're doing bilateral stimulation. I fall on the side of I'm a bit of a skeptic. I do think EMDR works, but in my experience, what I've seen be the most effective about it is people accessing this memory in a safe way. And when we're doing the bilateral stimulation, what's happening is you're accessing it in small doses so that your brain is able to process it a little bit at a time. So you can find articles on it. There's a lot of disagreement in the field. I will say that I have seen it work. I don't think it's magic. I really think that it's you accessing this memory in little bits and pieces. And what happens is as we go through the different memories, we're wanting to decrease the distress of the event. Maybe when you first think about the event, you get chills all over, you feel like you want to vomit, you're really upset. By the end of EMDR processing, you should get to the point where you can think about the memory without having a strong physical or emotional response. It is always going to be a bad memory. We are not trying to turn it into a good memory. What we are trying to do is make it so it is less intense, so that you can think about it and realize that it's a memory and you're not reliving it. The other thing that we want to do is we want to change your perception of yourself. As we go through each memory, we want to change that idea of I'm unlovable or I'm worthless to I'm a worthwhile person. I have value. I'm worthy of being loved. At the beginning of each memory, you're going to feel like that perception of yourself as worthless or unlovable is very strong. By the end of processing that memory, which could take 1 session, it could take 10 sessions. It's different for everyone. By the end of processing that memory, I want you to have a view of yourself as being worthwhile, as being lovable, as having value. Whatever you decide is how you want to feel, even when you're thinking about these traumatic things in your life that have happened to you. Those are the 2 main things that with each memory, as a therapist, I want to see change. The distress associated with the memory go down so that you can think about it and talk about it and even share it in appropriate ways with your loved ones so that they can better understand you if you want, and to think about yourself in a more adaptive way. As you process the different memories, most of my clients process about 4 to 6 memories. What happens is you also start to notice these larger patterns in your life that connect to each other. And you tap into your resilience. You tap into times that you have done good things, times you have had value, times you have been proud of yourself. And you start to remember that these negative, these traumatic memories, they aren't all of you. There's so much more to you than just these traumas that have happened to you. And so that's really what often folks get out of trauma therapy. It's not that we're erasing memories. It's not that the memories never bother them. What's happening is you're having a better perception of who you are, a more adaptive way to view yourself, and you're having less distress on a daily basis. And as you have less distress, these memories often come up less. They come up fewer times throughout the day, and when they do come up, they don't bother you as much. EMDR is really good for folks that are creative, who want to develop insights, who are okay with sort of this messy process, knowing that not every session is going to look the same. They're going to get different things out of it each time. EMDR is a wonderful therapy. I don't believe that it's the end-all be-all of trauma therapies. I have other trauma therapies I've seen be just as effective as EMDR. And that's something I would encourage you to think about when you look for a therapist. It can be really helpful to find a therapist that specializes in several different types of trauma therapies. I do at least 4. And what can be really helpful about that is that if one therapy isn't a good fit, you can always try a different therapy. And oftentimes if a therapy isn't a good fit, by the time we realize that, I will know the person well enough to recommend something that's going to be a really good fit. This session does this, and then we move on. If you have more questions about EMDR, if you're wondering if EMDR is the right fit, if it might help you, please reach out and I'm happy to talk.